ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाखया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। So here we find the importance of meditating on the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord being very nicely described by Lord Kapila. In the earlier verses, it was described Sthiram Brajantam Asinam Shayanam. So Prabhupada explains that the devotees of the Lord are accustomed to think of the Lord constantly. This is very important. Here is the difference between the yogis and the devotees of the Lord. Yogis have to sit down and meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for a very long time. If they want their heart to be purified. But for a devotee, he is accustomed to think of the lotus feet of the Lord 24 hours. So Prabhupada says, Sthiram, either the devotee is standing, Vrajantam, he is walking in the street, Asinam, he is sitting down, Shayanam, he is lying down. In any of these conditions of life, the devotee can remember the lotus feet of the Lord. How does he remember? So Prabhupada says, when we are worshipping the deities of the Lord regularly, the impression of the deity and especially the lotus feet of the Lord, it will be, the impression of the Lord will always be there in our mind. This impression of the Lord can be remembered by the devotee in any condition of life. So Prabhupada explains, therefore, one should understand how important it is for a neophyte to worship the deities regularly. And if we start thinking that we have become Haridas Thakur, let me just go and somewhere sit down and chant the holy name. Actually, we should not imitate these very advanced devotees of the Lord. In the very advanced stage, one has become accustomed to see the Supreme Lord everywhere, either in the temple, in his heart, in everyone's heart, everywhere he can see. But in our neophyte condition, we are not accustomed. We cannot see. So it is very important that we regularly participate in the deity worship of the Lord. Because by regularly participating either as a pujari or even attending the programs before the deities, we are always seeing the form of the Lord. Correct? When the pujari is bathing the Lord, he is able to see the form of the Lord. He is dressing the Lord, he is able to see the form of the Lord. He is worshipping and other devotees are also participating in that worship. We are always able to see the form of the Lord. So by constantly being engaged like this, the impression of the deity will always be there in our mind, and we will be able to remember that impression, the lotus feet of the Lord, in any condition of life. And what will be the benefit of that? It was explained in the previous verse also that the toenail of the Lord itself is so brilliant. It is like the orbit of the moon, which has so much of splendor that just by meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, that splendor which is coming out from his toenail can drive away the darkness in our heart. This material world is called darkness, tamo andham. So driving away darkness means what? Our samsriti will be finished. Our material existence in this world, it will be over. We'll become liberated from this world. This is the meaning of getting out of ignorance. This material world has resulted from ignorance, avidya. And the moment avidya is over, then we are back in spiritual world. And here, further, Lord Kapila is describing the glories of meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. So many beautiful aspects Lord Kapila is describing. So after describing that just by meditating on the toenails of the Lord, the darkness in the heart can be dispelled. Here Lord Kapila explains, our life will become completely auspicious just by meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. What to talk about ordinary living entity, even the one who is already very auspicious, he becomes more auspicious. Anyone remember? Recently we sung that song. Recently we sung one song, Bhakti Vinod Thakur's. Ek ho na bhuji na Prabhu. In that, Bhakti Vinod Thakur explains Lord Shiva obtains his auspiciousness, Shivatva, just by meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. So, Lord Shiva, he is already auspicious, being the devotee of the Lord. And he has become more auspicious because on his head, on his murdhani, he is holding river Ganga, which has its source, which has emanated from the lotus feet of the Lord. So, his auspiciousness becomes enhanced. This shows the importance of meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. That we are ordinary, even extraordinary. Lord Shiva, who is already very auspicious, even he becomes more auspicious by meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, or by holding on his head the river Ganga, which has emanated from the lotus feet of the Lord. So imagine our position if we meditate on the Supreme Lord, his lotus feet, how much auspicious we will become. And actually, the real inauspiciousness in this material world is all the different kinds of anarthas we are carrying from time immemorial. That is the cause of all our inauspiciousness in this material world. Therefore, Chaitanya Charitamrita describes ei bhalo, ei mando, ei sab manodharma. In this material world, nothing is auspicious. This is auspicious, this is inauspicious. No, everything is inauspicious. Because the moment we turn away from the Supreme Lord, it is inauspicious. So matter in its form, when we try to enjoy, is inauspicious. The same thing, when we turn it in the service of the Lord, becomes auspicious. The same money, the same material energy, everything becomes auspicious when it is utilized in the service of the Lord. When we try to enjoy, it is inauspicious because it will cause our bondage further. And when we employ in the service of the Lord, it becomes auspicious because it will liberate us from this material existence. So, there is nothing bhadra and abhadra in this material world. It depends on, if we use everything in the service of the Lord, it is all auspicious. And if we utilize everything for our sense gratification, everything is inauspicious. Prabhupada gives the example, 1 0, 2 0, 3 0, 1000 0, all 0. No value. But all of them will gain value the moment you put 1 before them. 1 0 will become 10, 2 0 will gain value 100, 3 zeros will become 1000. That is what we have to understand. So, inauspiciousness in our life is caused by the sins which have accumulated in our life from time immemorial. We have been accumulating material impressions all the different kinds of life we have passed from. Imagine actually how important it is not to fill our mind with further material impressions. We are not knowing how these impressions which we gain from our senses, they go and subtly reside in our consciousness. All the material impressions. That is why it is called subtle fall down. You are walking on the road and you see some material beauty and you appreciate that beauty, it is a subtle fall down. Because you are gaining that material impressions. And time will come when all these impressions will come out and they will be the cause of our fall down. So both are very important in spiritual life. If you want to ignite fire, not only you should put ghee, you should not put water. Both are required. You are nicely putting ghee, everything, but at the same time you are pouring water and mud on it, then fire will not ignite. It will take time. So, both are very, very important in Krishna consciousness. If we understand this, dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangasteshu upajayate. This is a science. On what you meditate, on what you concentrate your mind, on what you fix your consciousness, you will develop attachment for that. So negatively or positively, we should not think about the sense objects. Somebody, woman, I hate women. Somebody may be thinking. And he will develop. Because meditating either positively or negatively. He's walking everywhere and moment he's just looking, woman is there, he'll turn his face. So whether negatively or positively, when you meditate, you'll develop an attachment for that sense object. So that is not our process. Our process is we restrain and at the same time we fix our mind on the lotus feet of the Lord. We fix our consciousness on the Supreme Lord. Because the mountains of sin, it is so huge. It has built over a period of millions of lives. It has become like a heap of mountains. And in spite of that, sometimes we think, why, my dear Lord, I am suffering? Arey, millions of life you have made mountains of sins. And still you are thinking, why am I suffering? Isn't it? We are still thinking, why Krishna is giving me suffering? Isn't it? So first of all, we have to understand, Krishna is not inducing some new sufferings on us. It is all mountains we have built from many, many lifetimes. Now Krishna is giving us a chance to smash off this mountain. And the process is constantly thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord. So that is why it is being advised here. It is advised that one should meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for a long time. But Prabhupada is saying for a devotee, there is no question of long time because he is already accustomed to constantly think of the lotus feet of the Lord. This is the importance. Prabhupada in one of his lectures explains that actually these Mayavadis, they started a propaganda. We all know that. Very big propaganda was started. Why are you going to the temple? Don't you see so many Daridra Narayana outside? You can serve them. Why you need to go to the temple? But very quickly, because this is India, all these nonsense people may have their propaganda, but it was very quickly finished. Tirupati temple, even though these people are propagating, don't go to the temple, thousands and lakhs of people are going, having darshan of the Lord and benefiting. All these temples were established by great acharyas. So this is not some stone worship. It is the mercy of the Lord personified for the benefit of people. It is a very important aspect for the age of Kali Yuga. So, devotees are already constantly participating in the various programs in the temple, automatically derive that benefit of temple worship. So, that was the very important contribution of Srila Jiva Goswami. And that is how we find all these great acharyas, all of them, whether it is Rupa Goswami, he established a temple. Sanatan Goswami, he established a temple. Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he established a temple. So when we go to Vrindavan, we visit these 6 Goswamis' temples. Lokanath Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, all of them. So Srila Jiva Goswami, and we find Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally in his life. 24 years he spent in his sannyasa life in Jagannath Puri. 24 years. Performing Sankirtan, having the darshan of the Lord, isn't it? So Jiva Goswami has very nicely explained this, that even though in the age of Kali Yuga, Sankirtana is the Yuga Dharma, but the mind of conditioned soul in this age of Kali Yuga is very restless. So, in order to quickly purify the mind and arrest the disturbance, restlessness of the mind, deity worship is very essential. You see? So, Srila Jiva Goswami says, Panchratrika Vidhi and Bhagavat Vidhi, they should be always like a parallel line. Just like we find the train, it runs on parallel lines continuously and very smoothly it can run. So similarly, Panchratrika Vidhi, which involves Archana Paddhati, and Bhagavat Vidhi, which involves Shravanam Kirtanam, they should be always run parallelly. And that is why we find Srila Prabhupada introduced this in Krishna consciousness. So we perform Sankirtana, Arti, Vandanam, Archanam, everything in front of the Lord. So, the benefit which is achieved by the yogis can be very easily achieved by the devotees. Prabhupada further explains that actually this Sankirtana, chanting the holy name of the Lord, actually is non-different from meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. Because, as you can see here, the more you meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord, the dirt in your heart, the sins in your heart, they will be vanquished. Similarly, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains, Cheto darpana marjanam bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam. By constantly chanting the holy name of the Lord, the same benefit one can derive that just by, and it is very easy. Prabhupada explains, if somebody tells you, sit down and just think about the lotus feet of the Lord, it will not be possible. Our mind is very, very restless. Whereas, one can very easily meditate on the sound. The sound you vibrate and you hear that sound, it is much more easier. And that is how we find even a child, if you ask a child, restless child, to sit down and meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord, it is not possible. But if you ask a child to participate in kirtan, very nicely, very easily he will participate. He will also clap his hand. He will also dance along with the devotee. See? So, this is the benefit of Sankirtana, chanting the holy name of the Lord. The same benefit one derives. So, we are having meditation on the lotus feet of the Lord while doing our services, deity worship, participating in the kirtan and chanting the holy name of the Lord. So both way actually we are meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. Another important point which Prabhupada makes here, which is very important, Prabhupada says, these Mayavadis, first of all, they say God has no form. So, they are actually, they become bereft of such an important means of cleansing their heart. They are simply meditating on some void. Just imagine, if they meditated on the lotus feet of the Lord, all these sins accumulated in their heart can be wiped away. Unfortunately, they say God has no form. Sometimes they say God has no form, but they say in our conditioned life it is very difficult to think about formless. So you adopt it as a mean to go to formless. So there they prescribe, yes, you can meditate on the feet of Vishnu, Lord Shiva, Brahma, Ganesha, like that. So Prabhupada explains, they are called as Pashandis. In the Vedic literatures, that is why it is very important. Position of Lord Shiva is explained in this verse very clearly. What is his position? His position is that he has acquired importance because of importance of the lotus feet of the Lord. He has become auspicious because of the lotus feet of the Lord. So, it is highlighting the importance of the lotus feet of the Lord. So, Vedic literature says, anyone who claims or who even thinks, who compares that any of the demigods, they can be equal to the Supreme Lord. Sapashandi bhave dhruvam. Immediately he should be understood to be Pashandi. So that is a very important thing which Prabhupada is explaining in today's purport. Another important thing which Prabhupada is saying, it is very clearly said, Bhagavatas Charanara Vindam. So in today's, I think either today or we were reading it, Prabhupada says this is a modern invention of these, many submissions are there. So they want to compete because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was chanting always Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So they have started their new Kirtan, Kali Kirtan. So there is no mention anywhere in the Vedic literature. Kirtan means Kirtan for the Supreme Lord. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Padasevanam, that is for the Supreme Lord. So that is another very important point which Prabhupada mentions. Further we will find very beautifully how much importance the lotus feet of the Lord is there. That Mother Lakshmi never wants to leave the lotus feet of the Lord, always wants to serve the lotus feet. Like that, very beautifully it will be described about the glories of the lotus, meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.